Alright, hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Late Night Tips. In this week's episode we're going to take a look at how well the Octatrack works with the Roland TR8. Get right into it. Recently I had the opportunity to try out the Roland TR8 in my studio and I immediately took advantage of that opportunity. The main reason for my interest was that the recently released Roland TR8S looks like a super powerful drum synthesizer. And for a second there I was actually thinking about maybe replacing my analog rhythm with the TR8S. But before I pulled the trigger on that, I wanted to check if the TR8 workflow is something that I can get behind. So here it is the third day in my studio and I'm liking it so far. But for whatever the reason, the TR8 has received a lot of criticism from the community. People were calling it ugly, that it sounds not very good, and so on and so forth. Interestingly enough, we have a lot of haters criticizing the TR8, but on the other hand, we have a lot of amazing artists. People like Berg, for example, Ollie Laboratories has recorded amazing jams with the TR8. So my first impressions were that it was a super fun instrument. The faders are great, very musical. Also the scatter effect works really well and it generates some interesting effects. And what I really liked about it, especially after 2 years of leaning and looking at that tiny Elektron screen, was that everything was very hands-on, all the knobs were there and you just didn't have to really look. But I was also immediately made aware of the limitations, such as only 16 patterns, no screen to save your patterns and then recall it with your project. And also the fact that it has no motion recording meant that probably it wasn't an instrument for me. And then I started reading the MIDI implementation chart for the TR8 and I immediately realized what amazing potential there is between the Octatrack and the TR8. Why is that? First of all, it listens on one channel only, and it listens to all the instruments as MIDI notes on that one channel, which means that I don't need to use 12 channels to control it. I can just dedicate one channel to it, and it's very streamlined that way. It also takes CC messages for almost everything that you can see on this front panel. Plus, both the scatter effect and the faders are post-sequence, which means that even if you're sequencing this from an external device, the faders will still work. What does it really mean? Let's give it a try and find out. Let's start by sequencing a kick drum. It's actually very easy. I have it set up to MIDI channel 11, and I'm just going to play the C note, and it's going to give me a kick drum. So right now, let's make a very basic 4 on the floor. So immediately one thing that I see is that it actually listens to velocity. What I can immediately do is take advantage of 64 steps. So then let's move on to a snare drum. What's happening in here is that I have it set up to send the signal from the snare drum into a reverb using assignable outputs and then back into the unit. So I'm going to go to another channel and program some snares. Okay, that's obviously too much, but what I can do in here is I can make them conditional. Let's say I'm going to give them 13% chance of happening. And now this one's going to be a previous. Okay, and let's give them some velocity. This one, let's make it a little bit tougher. Maybe this one too. So we immediately can hear some movement and some variation happening thanks to trig conditions on the Octatrack, and also the velocity. Okay, so let's move over to the hi-hat. Here's the hi-hat sound. And what I can do is add some arpeggiator. Okay, how about we remove the length and set the length to something. Let me copy those pages. One thing we can immediately do is introduce some variations by changing the speed. Okay. So we immediately can hear some movement in here, and obviously if you're a fan of trap music, you can abuse that function. But that's not all. Manipulating the decay button on the Roland TR8 actually sounds really, really good. Let me show you. But you cannot record your motion. What you can do, however, is use CC messages. So I'm going to go to MIDI CC in here, Control 1, double tap, and I'm going to set up MIDI CC message 62 in here, which is responsible for closed hi-hat decay. Here we go, I have to press. And now activate this by pressing function and knob. And now it's on. Let's hear it. And now what I can do is just record the motion in the Octatrack. Using the scatter function on the TR8 is a lot of fun, and it's actually a very musical option to have. However, you really need to get it right for it to sound good. If you want to make it a little bit more predictable, you can actually program this also inside the Octatrack. And how you do it is actually very, very simple. I'm going to go to my CC page in here, and I'm going to select Control 1 at CC 70 in here, which is responsible for scatter on and off. I'm going to activate this, and now this is how it's... I'm going to go in here to step 3, and I'm going to activate it on this kick drum, and then deactivate it by dropping a trigless lock in here by pressing function and trig, and I'm going to deactivate the scatter in here. It sounds more or less the same every time it goes around, which makes it a little bit more controllable. But now, if I want to make it a little bit more crazy, I can use the LFO. First of all, I'm going to modulate the depth of the scatter effect. So how I do it, I go to my CC, I select 69, CC message 69 in here, which is responsible for scatter depth. Here we go, press to accept, of course, and then activate by pressing function and knob. And now you can see I turn it in here, and it's changing in here as well. Then I'm going to go to LFO, of course, and guess what? It's going to be a random waveform. CC2, random, and trig, and give it some depth. Whoa, crazy. And the really amazing thing about this combination is that almost everything is saved inside your project in here. With that in mind, you can also use all the other performance functions of the Roland TR8, such as mutes. Including rows and variation for rows. So you just need to go into instant play in here. Of course, in my setup, the TR8 is going through my preamp, the LPB tube. Just to give it a little bit more oomph. I really like this preamp, and it works rather well with the TR8. And probably the coolest element of the TR8 is that you can program this all on the Octatrack, but then use the USB output and record all 11 channels into your computer separately over USB, including your external inputs. So using 3 LFOs, CC control, and the fact that you can control everything on the panel, adding trig conditions to that, you can record a really amazing pattern and then stream it directly into your computer. Yeah, so that's it for this episode of Late Night Tips. I think that if this episode proves anything, it just proves that the Octatrack is still an amazing sequencer, one of the best sequencers on the market. But it also goes to show that the TR8 is a really well-designed performance instrument with a real focus on playing live and with sort of hands-on control. Now, having tried that, I'm pretty sure that the TR8S would be even better and it would be a great addition to the studio in here. Yeah, so that's it for this episode of Late Night Tips. Let me know in the comments what your experience is with the TR8. I'm really curious to find that out. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great night and take care.